Angelina sat across from Maya in a cozy cafe, the hum of conversations around them muffled by the weight of her words. She stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, her gaze distant, but her tone sharp with resentment. "You know, I don't get it," Angelina began, her voice tinged with bitterness. "Jackson left me for her. Can you believe that? For a Latina woman who posts every little thing about their life online like it's some kind of reality show." Maya, a close friend who often played the role of a listener rather than a challenger, raised her eyebrow but remained silent. She had known Angelina long enough to recognize when her friend was spiraling into one of her emotionally charged tirades. "And it's not just that he left me," Angelina continued, her words dripping with disdain. "He left me for someone beneath me." Alina, God, even her name sounds less sophisticated. Less everything. "I was the best thing that ever happened to Jackson. I didn't baby him, didn't pamper him like she does. That's probably what he wanted all along. A woman who wouldn't challenge him, who'd just smile and nod and cater to every whim." Maya shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "You really think that's the reason he left, Angelina? I mean, you two had issues." "Issues," Angelina scoffed, cutting her off. "We had no real issues until he met her. Let's be honest, she's not on my level. I mean, look at her. Posting every little thing on Instagram like she's some kind of influencer. Do you know how cringeworthy it is to watch her document every private moment between them? I wouldn't be surprised if Jackson's too blind to see it. But the rest of the world can. She's desperate for attention, and she's using him to get it." Maya finally interjected, her voice gentle but firm. "It sounds like you're more upset about her than you are about Jackson leaving." Angelina's lips curled into a sneer. "I just think he downgraded. That's all I'm saying. He traded me, an independent, strong woman, for someone who will pamper him like a child. And honestly, what does she know about real relationships? You know, where you work for it, fight for it, grow through it?" Maya glanced down at her cup, sensing that Angelina's frustration ran deeper than mere jealousy. It was about control. It was about race. But it was also about power. Angelina had never expected Jackson to leave her for someone she viewed as inferior. "Maybe Jackson's happy with her," Maya said cautiously. "Maybe it's not about her being beneath you, but about him finding something different." Angelina's eyes flashed. "Different? Sure. Less demanding. He couldn't handle a woman like me. And now he's with someone who just plays along, who will stroke his ego and let him be the man. It's pathetic." Maya sighed, realizing that this conversation wasn't about to end in understanding or peace. It was about Angelina grappling with her own insecurities, her own ability to comprehend why Jackson would choose a woman she deemed lesser both in terms of race and character. Later that week, Angelina's resentment simmered beneath the surface as she entered the upscale restaurant. She had agreed to meet an old colleague for lunch, but the moment she stepped inside, her eyes landed on Jackson and Alina seated by the window. They were laughing, leaning in close, seemingly in their own little world. Angelina froze for a second, her chest tightening. It wasn't just that Jackson had moved on, it was who he had moved on with. A woman who, in Angelina's eyes, represented everything she wasn't. As she approached the hostess stand, Jackson looked up and their eyes locked. Angelina, his voice carried both surprise and a hint of hesitation. He hadn't expected to run into her. Alina turned toward her as well, her face lighting up with a polite, albeit cautious smile. She was strikingly beautiful, with long dark hair and warm brown skin, her features soft and radiant. Yet to Angelina, it was all a facade. "Jackson," Angelina said, her tone controlled but with a thinly veiled edge. "It's been a while." Jackson stood, as did Alina, and it was then that Angelina noticed something. The way Alina's hand rested gently on Jackson's arm, the subtle intimacy between them, the ease. "And you must be." Angelina forced a smile, though her eyes betrayed the hostility simmering beneath. "I've heard so much about you. Instagram, right? You two make quite the couple online." Alina's smile wavered, recognizing the underlying jab. "Yes, I like to share moments that are important to us. It's just a way of connecting with people." Connecting with people, Angelina echoed, raising an eyebrow. Or, maybe, putting on a show for attention. Jackson's expression tightened. Angelina, let's not do this. Alina placed a hand on Jackson's arm, her voice calm and steady. It's okay, Jackson. She has her opinions. Angelina's smile widened, though it lacked warmth. Oh, I have opinions, all right. Like how it's interesting to see how much has changed. You know, it's funny, you're all about social media, aren't you, Alina? Documenting every moment as if life is one big reality show. You must be loving all the attention. Alina's eyes met Angelina's, unwavering. I document our moments because they matter to us, not because I need approval from others. I think everyone shares things differently. If that bothers you, then I don't know what to tell you. Angelina let out a cold laugh, glancing briefly at Jackson. You've really changed, Jackson. You used to hate all this public display stuff. Now look at you, smiling for the camera, playing along. You used to want privacy. Jackson's jaw clenched. People grow, Angelina. They change. You can either respect that or keep holding on to whatever it is you think you know about me. The tension between the three was palpable. The restaurant's ambient noise seemed to fade into the background as the charged atmosphere took over their small corner of the world. Well, I suppose some things change, Angelina said, her gaze flicking back to Alina. But I guess others don't. Some people are still willing to do anything for attention, aren't they? Alina stepped forward slightly, her voice calm but firm. I don't need to explain myself to you. And I don't need to justify my relationship with Jackson to anyone, least of all you. The finality in Alina's voice silenced Angelina, who found herself momentarily at a loss for words. Jackson, sensing the brewing storm, stepped in between them, his arm protective around Alina's waist. We don't owe you anything, Angelina, Jackson said quietly but with conviction. We're happy. That's all that matters. Angelina, realizing she had lost the upper hand, simply nodded, her smile tight and forced. Well then, I'll leave you two lovebirds to your little show. As she walked away, Jackson and Alina exchanged a glance. Whatever storm Angelina had tried to stir, they had weathered it together. It wasn't the first time they faced judgment, and it wouldn't be the last. But together they stood strong despite the opinions of others, despite the racial undertones, and despite the challenges ahead. The tension in the air was palpable as Angelina leaned back in her chair, her lips curling into a condescending smile. She glanced at Jackson and Alina with a critical eye, her gaze lingering just a second too long on Alina. The silence between them was heavy, but Angelina wasted no time breaking it. Her voice, laced with subtle disdain, cut through the air like a blade. So she began, her tone sweet but with an edge. I couldn't help but notice how things between you two escalated so quickly. I mean, Alina, you proposing to Jackson, she chuckled, the sound mocking. That's unexpected. But I suppose for someone with your background it makes sense. Alina's eyes flickered with confusion, unsure of how to respond to the thinly veiled insult. Jackson's jaw clenched, sensing the tension rising. Angelina's words were deliberate, calculated to undermine. I mean, Angelina continued, not waiting for a response. It's common, isn't it? For women like you to do whatever it takes to keep a man? You know, always eager to please, never wanting to rock the boat. She glanced sideways at Jackson, as if searching for agreement. It's like, you're willing to do anything just to hold on. Alina stiffened in her seat, feeling the sting of the comment. The words were carefully crafted, insinuating not only that she was desperate but also hinting at a deeper prejudice. Women like you, the phrase hung in the air, heavy with implication. Angelina's remarks weren't just about the proposal, they were an attack on Alina's identity, her culture, her heritage. You don't understand, do you? Angelina pressed on, her tone growing more condescending. This whole thing, it's embarrassing. Not just for you, but for Jackson too. The man is supposed to be in control, to take the lead. But I guess that's not something you'd understand, given where you come from. Jackson's fists clenched under the table, the muscles in his arms tensing. He had tolerated Angelina's pettiness before, But this was crossing a line. Alina, though hurt, remained composed, her silence dignified in the face of such blatant disrespect. You know, Angelina added, leaning forward slightly, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. I just feel bad for Jackson. He deserves better. Someone who knows her place. Someone who doesn't undermine him like that. He probably only went along with your little proposal because he felt pressured. Women like you just don't know how to let a man be a man, do you? The silence that followed was deafening. Alina's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to let Angelina see her falter. The room seemed to grow smaller, the weight of Angelina's words suffocating. Jackson's anger simmered just beneath the surface, his breath coming in shallow, controlled bursts. Jackson had heard enough. His voice was low and steady, but the fury in his eyes was unmistakable. Angelina, that's enough, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned toward her, his gaze unwavering, cutting through her thin veneer of superiority. You don't get to talk about her like that. Angelina blinked, taken aback by his sudden firmness. She had expected him to stay silent, to let her words hang in the air, but Jackson wasn't going to let it slide. You think you know her, Jackson continued, his voice growing stronger with every word. You think you understand anything about who she is or where she comes from? You don't know a damn thing. Alina glanced at Jackson, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and love. His words were a shield, protecting her from the ugliness of Angelina's prejudice. Alina has stood by me, Jackson said, his eyes never leaving Angelina's. She's been there for me through everything, through every challenge, every setback, every success. She doesn't need to prove anything to you or to anyone else. What we've built together is real, and it's not for you to judge. Angelina's face flushed with embarrassment, but Jackson wasn't done. And as for your comments about where she comes from, he shook his head, incredulous. That's your own prejudice talking, not mine. You want to make this about race, about culture, about some outdated idea of what a relationship should look like. But you're wrong. Love isn't about control. It's not about who proposes to who or who takes the lead. It's about mutual respect. It's about standing by each other through everything, and Alina has done that more than anyone else ever has. Angelina opened her mouth to speak, but Jackson cut her off. You want to say that Alina's background makes her less than? That she's somehow inferior because she doesn't fit your idea of what a proper woman should be? That's your problem, not ours. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, but the intensity remained. You know what's really embarrassing, Angelina? It's not Alina proposing to me. It's not her sharing her love with the world. What's embarrassing is your narrow-mindedness, your inability to see past your own biases. Angelina's face twisted in anger, but Jackson didn't flinch. He had nothing to prove to her. You think I'm with her because she's submissive? Because she's desperate? You're wrong. I'm with her because she challenges me, because she makes me better, and I'm proud of her for who she is and for where she comes from. He took a deep breath, his voice softening but still firm. Love isn't about conforming to some outdated expectation, especially when those expectations are rooted in ignorance and discrimination. It's about two people choosing each other over and over again, no matter what society thinks. And that's exactly what Alina and I are doing. The weight of Jackson's words hung in the air, filling the space with an unspoken truth. Angelina, for once, had nothing to say. She sat back, her expression a mix of shock and frustration. She had underestimated the strength of their bond, and now she was left with nothing but her own bitter prejudice. Alina reached for Jackson's hand, a silent gesture of appreciation. Together they faced the world, their love unshaken by the judgments of others. The confrontation ended, but the impact of Jackson's defense reverberated through the room. The conversation had shifted from petty jealousy to something much deeper, a confrontation of prejudice, a stand against societal norms that had no place in their relationship. Jackson and Alina knew that, no matter what anyone thought, they would always have each other. And that was all that mattered. Angelina sat across from Jackson and Alina at the small restaurant, her expression growing colder as the conversation turned personal. Her posture stiffened, and her eyes narrowed slightly as she glanced at Alina, scrutinizing her from head to toe. There was a moment of silence before Angelina spoke again, this time with an unmistakable edge in her voice. "Alina, I don't know if you understand this," she started, her words slow and deliberate, "but in most relationships there are certain rules. Traditions, things are supposed to go a certain way. For example, the man is supposed to propose, not the other way around." Her tone was laced with a condescending smirk, one that hinted at deeper prejudices. Alina's smile faltered, but she remained composed. Jackson's brow furrowed, sensing where this was heading. "I mean," Angelina continued, now leaning slightly forward, "I get it. You come from a different background and maybe that's why you don't get it. But around here, we don't break these traditions. It's a sign of respect. You should let the man take the lead. It's just proper." Her eyes flickered to Jackson, gauging his reaction, but his face remained stoic. Angelina's next words hit harder, her true intentions slipping through. "Honestly, it feels like you're desperate for attention, Alina. Like you're doing all this just to keep Jackson interested. Maybe it's because of where you're from. People from your background are often so eager to please, aren't they? But that's not love, Alina. That's weakness, and it's sad to watch." The air between them thickened with tension. Angelina's words cut deep, the racial undertones clear. She wasn't just talking about relationship norms, she was attacking Alina's very identity, her upbringing, and her culture. There was no mistaking the disdain in her voice, as if Alina's actions were somehow inferior because of where she came from. Alina's hands tightened in her lap, her calm exterior cracking slightly. She opened her mouth to respond, but Jackson spoke first. Jackson's usually calm demeanor was replaced by a sharp intensity as he leaned forward, his eyes locked on Angelina. His voice, though steady, carried a simmering anger beneath the surface. "Angelina, that's enough," he said firmly, his tone commanding attention. "I didn't think you could sink this low, but here we are." Angelina blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the force of his words, but she quickly recovered, folding her arms across her chest with an air of defiance. Jackson continued, not allowing her the chance to interrupt. "You think this is about tradition? About some outdated idea of who should propose to who? No, this is about love, real love. And what you just said, that's got nothing to do with tradition. That's got everything to do with your narrow-mindedness and your prejudice." Alina looked at Jackson, her eyes wide with a mixture of gratitude and emotion, but she remained silent, letting him take the lead. "Let me tell you something about proper," Jackson said, his voice growing more intense. "Proper is respecting the person you claim to care about. Proper is loving someone without letting the world tell you how it should be done. What Alina did proposing to me, that was one of the bravest, most genuine acts of love I've ever experienced. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't desperation. It was strength. The kind of strength you wouldn't understand." Angelina's lips tightened, her eyes narrowing as she prepared to respond, but Jackson pressed on, his words cutting through her defensiveness. "You say she doesn't understand how things work around here, but what do you even mean by that? Because the way I see it, what you're really saying is that you don't think she belongs. You don't think she's good enough for me because of where she's from, because of who she is." His voice dropped lower, carrying the weight of his anger. "But here's the truth. Alina has faced more in this life than you could ever imagine. We both have, and we've done it together." Angelina scoffed. But Jackson continued, his voice unwavering. "You don't get to judge us. You don't get to sit there and act like you know anything about our relationship. While you're busy clinging to outdated norms, we're building something real, something that lasts. And you know what? I had already planned to propose to Alina long before she did. I bought the ring. I had the whole thing planned out." He paused, glancing at Alina, whose eyes were now filled with tears. "But the fact that she beat me to it, that's what makes her special. She doesn't wait for life to happen to her. She makes things happen. And I love her for that." Jackson turned back to Angelina, his gaze hard. "I don't care what society says or what you think is proper. I don't care about your small-minded views on relationships or race. Alina and I, we love each other. That's all that matters, and I'll stand by her always." Angelina's face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and frustration, but she said nothing. The weight of Jackson's words hung in the air between them, unchallenged. As Jackson sat back in his seat, Alina reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. The silence stretched on for a few moments before Angelina, unable to hold her composure any longer, stood up abruptly. "You two deserve each other," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "Good luck with that." Without another word, she stormed out of the restaurant, leaving Jackson and Alina behind. They exchanged a glance, both relieved and exhausted by the confrontation, knowing that what they had just faced wasn't just about them as individuals, but the prejudices they would have to overcome together. Jackson kissed Alina's hand gently, a silent promise to stand by her through it all. They didn't need the world's approval. They had each other, and that was enough. The restaurant was buzzing with the low hum of conversations, clinking cutlery, and the soft melodies of live music drifting through the air. It was a warm evening, the kind that invites laughter and joy, but for Jackson, tonight held an intensity that surged beneath the surface. His palms were slightly clammy, and as he glanced over at Alina, her vibrant smile made his heart race even faster. He had carried the small velvet box in his jacket pocket for weeks, waiting for the right moment. And now it seemed like everything was falling into place except for the heavy, uninvited presence of Angelina. Angelina sat across from them, pretending to be engaged in casual conversation, but her cold stares and passive-aggressive comments had been simmering all night. She had questioned their relationship in ways that felt sharp and uncomfortable, often dipping into veiled racism. The way she scrutinized Alina, emphasizing her Latina heritage as if it were an inconvenience, made Jackson's blood boil. He knew what he had to do to break free from this cycle of doubt, to take a stand not only for love but also for what was right. The time was now. Jackson took a deep breath, the hum of the restaurant fading into the background as he turned to Alina. "Alina," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. He gently pulled the ring from his jacket pocket, the diamond catching the soft candlelight that flickered on their table. Alina gasped softly, her hand covering her mouth in shock. The other patrons nearby fell silent, their attention drawn to the couple in the middle of the restaurant. Whispers spread quickly, and eyes widened, some with surprise, others with thinly veiled disapproval. It wasn't just a proposal happening before their eyes, it was the defiance of tradition, of societal norms, and, for some, a challenge to deeply ingrained prejudices. "From the moment I met you," Jackson continued, his gaze locked on Alina's, "I knew you were different. You've stood by me. You've shown me what it means to love without limits, without fear, without the need to fit into a mold. You've given me strength in ways no one ever has. And I want to spend the rest of my life showing you that same love. Alina, will you marry me?" Tears welled in Alina's eyes as she nodded, barely able to speak through the overwhelming emotion that choked her throat. "Yes, Jackson," she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. 1,000 times yes. The moment they embraced, the applause was hesitant, scattered at first. Some patrons clapped with genuine happiness, while others shot disapproving looks or whispered amongst themselves, shaking their heads. Jackson could feel the weight of their stares, but he didn't care. His world was right here in Alina's arms. In the corner of his eye, Jackson noticed Angelina's clenched jaw, her eyes filled with contempt. She was fuming, clearly unable to digest the fact that not only had Alina broken traditional gender roles by proposing earlier, but now Jackson had sealed the deal in such a public, defiant manner. The tension was thick in the air, and it was clear that this was more than just about a relationship. It was about challenging the racial and societal barriers that had always been in place, and Angelina wasn't ready for that change. Angelina's face was a mask of cold fury, her knuckles white as she gripped her wine glass. She had managed to remain civil throughout the dinner, but now, watching Jackson kneel before Alina, hearing their shared words of love, it was too much for her to bear. The image of Jackson, the man she once thought she had control over, so publicly displaying his love for someone like Alina, a Latina woman who didn't fit Angelina's narrow expectations of what a partner should be, was infuriating. As Jackson and Alina sat back down, Angelina seized the moment, her voice cutting through the soft murmur of the restaurant. She began, her tone dripping with venom. I suppose it's quite fitting that this is all happening in such a public place. Alina, you really know how to put on a show, don't you? First proposing to a man how desperate, and now this spectacle. Tell me, do you post everything for the world to see? Or do you keep some moments private? Alina stiffened, her smile faltering as Angelina's words sliced through the joy of the moment like a cold blade. The sting of those pointed accusations rooted not only in outdated gender roles but also in deeper, unspoken racial prejudice cut deeper than Alina wanted to admit. Jackson's hand tightened around hers, grounding her, his silent reassurance a reminder that she wasn't alone. He could feel her trembling, the weight of the scrutiny from the restaurant, the whispered disapproval of those around them. Before he could respond, Angelina's voice rose, more venomous now, emboldened by her own arrogance. You know, Alina, she sneered, her words dripping with condescension, you're setting a horrible example. Women don't propose to men. That's not how it's done. And let's not even start on your Instagram following. What are you teaching them? That it's okay for a woman to chase after a man? That you can step out of your place? It's embarrassing, really. You're embarrassing yourself and every woman who follows you. A hush fell over the restaurant. Alina felt the burn of tears welling in her eyes, not just from the cruelty of Angelina's words, but from the weight of the expectations she knew the world held for her. Being a Latina woman in an interracial relationship had always come with its own set of challenges. But this, being told in front of everyone that her love, her actions, her very existence somehow tarnished the image of womanhood, that was a cruelty she hadn't anticipated. She felt exposed, like every insecurity she had ever buried was now on display for the world to see. Jackson's voice broke through the tension like a storm parting the clouds, calm but unyielding, his words a shield against the bitter onslaught. Angelina, that's enough, he said, his tone low but firm, each word sharp as a blade. What you're saying isn't just wrong, it's hurtful, and it's rooted in ideas that have no place in this world anymore. Alina has shown more strength and grace in her actions than you could ever understand. You see this as embarrassing? You see the proposing as desperate? That's your problem, not hers. Because love, real love, doesn't come with rules. It's not bound by tradition, gender roles, or race. And the fact that you can't see that says more about you than it ever will about her. Angelina's face flushed, her carefully constructed facade starting to crumble. Her eyes, once filled with icy confidence, now flickered with the flames of rage. She couldn't bear at the sight of Jackson defending Alina so fiercely, so passionately, standing up for her in ways he never had with Angelina. The truth was, it wasn't just jealousy fueling her attack, it was fear. Fear of being irrelevant, fear of seeing Jackson happy with someone who wasn't like her, someone who defied the rules she lived by. Oh, please, Angelina spat, her voice shaking with fury. Her composure was unraveling. You think this is about love? You're too blinded by your own ego to see the truth. Stop. Jackson's voice was like steel, cutting her off with a finality that echoed through the now silent restaurant. You don't get to decide what our relationship is. You don't get to judge it. And you sure as hell don't get to shame Alina for being the incredible woman she is. She's more than enough. Your jealousy, your prejudice, it ends here. Angelina stared at him, her face frozen in shock and disbelief. The rest of the restaurant watched with bated breath. Alina, her hand still in Jackson's, felt her heart swell with pride. This wasn't just a defense of their love, this was Jackson standing against every prejudice, every unfair judgment they had faced as an interracial couple. She wasn't just his fiancée, she was his partner, his equal, and no one, not even someone from his past, could take that from her. Alina's eyes, shimmering with unshed tears, locked onto Jackson's, and in a soft, trembling voice she whispered, "Let's go." It was a simple plea, but behind those words lay the strength of a woman who had fought against not just a bitter ex, but a world that had constantly tried to define her. The air between them crackled with an unspoken understanding, the kind that only two people bound by something deeper than love could share. They rose to their feet, hand in hand, a united front against the weight of everything unsaid, everything judged, and everything expected of them. But before they left, Jackson paused, turning to face Angelina one final time. His gaze was steady, unwavering, as if the very soul of him had been carved out in that moment of clarity. "We are happy," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had endured the unspoken slights, the subtle sneers, and the open criticism for far too long. "That's all that matters. Your opinions, your judgments, they hold no power over us. This is our life, and we'll live it on our terms, not yours, not society's." It wasn't just a statement. It was a declaration of final breaking of chains that had tried to bind him to the expectations of a world that had never fully accepted him or Alina. And in that instant, Jackson wasn't just standing up for their relationship. He was standing up for every person who had ever been told their love wasn't good enough, wasn't right enough, because it didn't fit into someone else's box. They walked out of the restaurant, heads held high, leaving behind more than just the whispers, the disapproving glances, and the suffocating tension. With every step, they left behind the crushing weight of outdated norms, societal pressures that had tried to define who they could love and how. It wasn't just a walk, it was a shedding of burdens. Every footfall seemed to strip away the layers of prejudice that had clung to them, trying to hold them back, to fit them into a mold they no longer belonged to. Outside, the night air greeted them with a crispness that felt almost celebratory, as if the universe itself had shifted to make space for their love, for their boldness in defying tradition and expectation. The cool breeze kissed their faces, and with it came the sweet release of freedom, a freedom that no amount of judgment could ever take from them. Alina turned to Jackson, her eyes now brimming not with tears of sorrow, but with the overwhelming love and gratitude she felt for this man beside her. He looked down at her, and in that moment no words were necessary. Everything they had fought for, every battle against prejudice, every moment they had stood against the world was there in their shared gaze. They both knew it then. This wasn't just about defying one person's bitterness or an ex's jealousy. It was about more. It was about showing the world that their love was not something to be questioned or dissected by others. It was theirs, and no one, no societal norm, no judgmental onlooker could take that from them. Together they had risen above the noise, above the limitations that others tried to place on them. Together they had proven that love, when true, is unstoppable. Not because it's loud or defiant, but because it simply is. And as they walked into the night, the future felt limitless, a blank canvas where they could write their own story. It was a story of love unshackled by the expectations of others, a story of two people who had dared to live boldly in a world that often demanded conformity. Together, they were writing the next chapter, one filled with the quiet, steady strength of two souls intertwined, ready to take on whatever came next, not as individuals, but as one united, unstoppable force.